All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Workforce Wednesday webinar. My name is Kirsten Bayer, and I'm with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University. Welcome, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. A couple of housekeeping things before I hand it off to our presenter, Anita Kerr. Thank you for joining us today, Anita, and I'll let you introduce yourself here in a second. We are on Zoom meeting today, as opposed to these webinars are typically hosted on Zoom webinar. So we've been interchanging them, allowing the presenter to kind of pick how interactive they want the presentation to be. So Anita has a lot of interactive opportunities for you all today. So we encourage you to use the chat. And then we encourage you to unmute yourself and turn on your video and ask questions whenever Anita breaks for Q&A time. However, I did just want to make you all aware that this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our website as well as Illinois WorkNet. So whenever the presentation is going on, we ask that you refrain from unmuting yourselves and then making sure that your camera, if you have it on, that you're maintaining attention with the presenter and not multitasking in any way, because we have had people on recordings who are multitasking, and it can just be distracting for the rest of the audience who's watching. So if you do need to step away from the presentation at any moment or answer a quick phone call or anything, we just ask that you make sure you're muted and turn your camera off. Otherwise, we invite you to have them on so you can fully participate in today's webinar. We do have closed captioning on for accessibility reasons as well as note-taking purposes, so feel free to turn that on. And like I said, this is being recorded, and the presentation slides from today with all of the hyperlinks and resources that Anita is going to provide for you all, as well as the recording, will be posted on our website as well as Illinois WorkNet. It typically takes about 48 business hours to get those edited and posted, so please allow our team that time. Tomorrow, you will receive a follow-up email that within the email, it will have the link where you can access the slides, recordings, and any resources. So you'll get that information, as well as the follow-up email also has a follow-up survey in it. We, myself and my director, we sit on the WIOA Professional Development Committee, which has a representation from all 4 core partners. And we do look at those surveys on a quarterly basis. There is a question on there where you can let us know if there's any future professional development topics that you would like us to pursue providing professional development or technical assistance for. And then we also have other questions regarding to this specific presentation. It's only a 5-question survey, so I know it can be tedious sometimes to take a survey or follow-up survey, but only 5 questions, so we do encourage your participation for that, and we thank you for it in advance. And then the only other thing that I wanted to just do really quickly is that we have our just beginning Workforce Wednesday webinar polls. If you've ever been on a Workforce Wednesday webinar, you've probably taken one of these polls before. So I've just launched the first poll. It's just asking, where's your local area at today? Just so we can make sure that we're hitting the whole span of the state, because we do provide professional development for the whole state of Illinois, for all 4 core partners and other WIOA partners and stakeholders, and all of our LWIAs as well. And frontline staff. So we just want to make sure that we're hitting the whole state when we're marketing out our professional development and in terms of attendance. So we'll give everyone a couple more seconds to answer this poll. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end that, share the results just to debrief really quickly. Looks like we have mostly central and northern Illinois. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate your participation. And then typically we do another Workforce Wednesday webinar poll asking you which partner you're a part of. But Anita is going to encompass that into her presentation. So I'm going to wait to do that poll whenever she prompts me. So I'll go ahead and hand it off to our presenter today, Anita Kerr, and let her introduce herself.
Great. Thank you, Kirsten. Hi, everybody. I'm Anita. I'm happy to join you today from the Southern Illinois Professional Development Center. Specifically, we work with adult education, teachers, and supporting staff in that title. Today, we're going to be talking about maximizing our teaching and training time with multidisciplinary approaches. That's our goal. So no matter what your background and what your role, hopefully we can speak to something that is relevant to you today. So a little bit about myself. I have been in adult education for 24 years. That sounds scary to say out loud. And I've been a teacher. I've been a coordinator at a local program. I have done faculty teaching at my local community college. And now I'm working in professional development. So I train teachers who are teaching adult education. And I love doing it. I love working with adults. And I also still teach a GED class on the side too in the evenings, just because I can't give up my students. So great to be with you today as we talk about teaching and training. So I want to just say before we get started, sometimes as you're sitting and watching a session and you're listening, you may think, oh, I got to write that down. I've got to jot that down. Just to put you at your ease, as Kirsten said, the recording will be available. The slides are going to come out. And I have what's called a Padlet, which is just a resource that's a digital resource. It's kind of like a little bulletin board, and it has everything that I'm going to share today is going to exist on that Padlet. And the link to that is here in the slide deck. So you can access that resource at the end of the presentation, as well as when you get the slide deck. It'll just be a quick and easy access point for everything we're going to talk about today after the fact. So as Kirsten mentioned, we do want to know a little bit about our group today so that we kind of can tailor our conversation to your needs. So Kirsten's going to launch a Zoom poll for us very quickly that just has 2 questions on it. It's going to ask about in what title you're associated with, Title 1, 2, 3, or 4, and also what role you play in your program or in your workplace. So there is the poll. If you wouldn't mind, you'll have to scroll down probably to see the second one. Thank you for filling that out for me. That'll help us know who our audience is today. Thank you. Give you just a couple seconds to complete that. Thanks, everybody. Okay. Great. So we've got, it looks like a nice balance between Title I and Title II. Excellent. Thank you, all of you, for being here. It's lovely to have that representation. And your work role, we have several teachers, we have some administrators, coordinators, and then we have my very favorite group, Other, which is where I always fall for my full-time job as a PD provider. I usually don't fit in a category, so I'm almost always Other. So hi, Others. Welcome to you. I understand and feel you. Okay, great. Thank you. That's very helpful. And that way we know where we're coming from. Feel free to close that box on your screen if it's still there. And we're going to jump in. One thing I will say, as we kind of know who we have on our webinar today, is when we're talking about an example of some kind, giving you a resource or giving you an example, if it doesn't exactly fit the role that you play in your work life, I want you to try to approach the concept with a little bit of flexibility and think, well, what she's talking about doesn't really impact me directly, but I understand the perspective, what she's talking about. I could understand that in my job by this. So try to keep that flexible approach as we go today so that we can talk to both of our Title I and Title II friends equally today. So thank you for that. All right. So as we get started, I wanted to share with you one concept here that was given to me by a friend of mine whom I work with at Lincoln Land Community College in the central part of the state. We were chatting one day about how people in adult education who are in the classroom, who are working in workforce supports, are just overwhelmed, that there is so much to learn, there's so much to do. Everyone has so many different needs. We're talking about when we're working with supporting staff members, supporting teachers, anyone who is supporting in that role, we were talking about how best to help them. You know, when you're the person in the trenches, whether you're in the classroom as a teacher or whether you're behind the desk running kind of the frontline work, you are often being asked to support someone, multiple someones, in all these different ways. But who is supporting you, right? Like who is coming behind you and offering you help? So that's kind of where this webinar came from, was the idea that you're carrying a big load in your role and juggling a lot of things. And so when we get in that overwhelmed mode, we often feel like we are maybe paralyzed is the right word, right? I've just frozen. I don't know what to do. So in the case of adult education, for instance, which again is my direct perspective, this might be a typical list that an educator would see. I'm responsible for doing these things. I have to get students ready for high school equivalency exams. I'm supposed to be teaching college and career readiness to meet all the WIOA guidelines in my title. I have content standards I'm supposed to teach to. I have all these evidence-based research practices I'm supposed to be incorporating. Oh, plus I'm supposed to teach my students how to use technology while I'm using technology myself. And I'm supposed to be meeting these federal and state level targets that have been set for me through my WIOA title, which all of us have to face. And when we have that list, and your list may look different depending on what your role is, but I'll bet it's still a complicated, multi-layered list, right? And when that happens, we often feel like we have to scramble to do it all, do everything all at once. And when we do that, we do know that the quality of our work tends to suffer. So I want to show you this interesting screen here. There are 4 little bullet points on my screen, all of which are pieces of evidence to support this claim at the top that says, research says we are poor multitaskers. I wonder if any of you have heard this before. Maybe you've heard an NPR report, or maybe you've listened to a podcast or something, and it talked about how humans are really bad at multitasking. If you've heard that before, maybe you would open your Zoom chat and throw that comment in there. Is this a familiar thought to you, or maybe this is a new idea? Here are 4 different resources that tell us that we're not good at multitasking. So let's take a peek at these. What do we notice as a common thread? Doing more than one task at a time takes a toll on productivity. That's the APA. Stanford says that multitasking is less productive than if we just did one thing at a time. Right? Practical advice from a neuroscientist: don't multitask. It ruins productivity. Do you sense a theme? And then Harvard Business Review post, the research is that multitasking can lead to about a 40% drop in productivity. And it increases our stress level at the same time. So if you're thinking about being productive, about being efficient and effective at your role, multitasking is one of those things that we feel like we have to do because it's kind of in our culture. It's kind of in the zeitgeist, right? We're supposed to be doing this. But actually, no, the experts would say it's not good for us. Yeah. Adriana says our brains are not wired to multitask. That's exactly right. The experts would agree with you that it's not that we can't do it because we're not good people or good workers. It's that literally our brains are not built for that. So you may be thinking, okay, interesting. Do you have any proof of this? Well, guess what? We're going to make some proof together here that this is true. We're going to do this as a little experiment together as a group. If you're willing to come along with me here, we're going to do a little activity. So what I would ask you to do is to find a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil. It could just be a piece of scrap paper as long as it's one whole piece, and a pen and a pencil. If you could pull that out and have it handy, I'm going to ask you to do a little activity with me along with the video of this gentleman who's going to walk us through it. So I'll give you just a second to get yourself organized here. If you do not have a pen and a piece of paper in front of you, it's okay. You can participate and watch because he's going to demonstrate for us. But it's fun to do this. I did it the other day in a room full of college age students that I teach in another setting. And it was fascinating to watch them because A, they're competitive and they all wanted to do this a certain way. And it was fun to watch them at the end and hear their honest answers. So one thing, he is going to give you the guidance about how to do the activity. It's going to all come through the video. So if you listen to his voice, he'll give you your directions. In a minute, he's going to say, do this on your paper, but don't do it yet. He's going to show you what it's going to look like at the end. And then he's going to say, start. Okay. So don't start writing until he says go. Okay. I'm going to start the play. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. But here we go with our experiment.
Trying to multitask may feel effective, but it's actually counterproductive. In fact, it doesn't really exist. Not in the way most people think about it. In my book, The Myth of Multitasking, I show that what's occurring is either backtasking or switch tasking. You backtask when something that doesn't require your attention occurs in the background, like baking bread in the oven while you make a salad. Backtasking can be productive, but the problem is most people who think they're multitasking aren't backtasking, they're switch tasking. Switch tasking occurs when you try to do two or more attention-requiring tasks at the same time, like trying to watch this video while you're sending a text message. Switch tasking is everywhere, and it's a thief. It robs you of time, money, and your mental and emotional health. You're going to experience firsthand what I mean in this little exercise. Grab a piece of paper and a pen or pencil. Turn that paper sideways and draw 3 evenly spaced lines across it. This gives you 4 empty rows. By the way, there's also a downloadable worksheet with all these instructions available at the link on the screen. But for now, a pen and paper will do. Now this exercise is timed, so don't start until I say go. You're going to recopy in the first row this phrase, switch tasking is a thief. Then in the second row, you're just going to write the numbers 1 through 21, one number for each letter in the phrase. Make your paper look just like what you see on the screen. I'll call out the time every 5 seconds so you'll know your rough finish time. Got your pen and paper in front of you? Get ready, get set, and go. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. 20. We'll go 10 more. 25. And 30. And most people should be done by this point. Write down your approximate finish time. Now, we're going to do this again, but we're going to simulate switch tasking, trying to perform multiple attention-requiring tasks at the same time. So, you're going to, again, recopy the phrase, switch tasking is a thief, in the third row, and all the numbers 1 through 21 in the fourth row. But this time, for every letter that you write in the third row, you're going to write the corresponding number in the fourth row. So you'll write S, and then 1, W, and then 2, I, and then 3, and so on, until you make the third and fourth row look just like what you did the first time you did this. We'll time this again with me calling out the time every 5 seconds. Get your paper and your pencil ready, get set, and go. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. 20. 25. 30. This is where we were when we stopped last time. 35. 40. 45. 50 seconds. We'll go 10 more. 55. And 60. And if you're not done now, just give up. You just experienced a taste of the first 3 effects of switch tasking. First, the amount of time it takes to complete things increases. In some of your cases, up to twice as long as the first time. Second, the quality of the work decreases. Compare the work you did each time. Did you make mistakes? Did you finish on a number other than 21? Did your handwriting get worse? And third, consider how you felt the first time versus the second time. Most people, when they switch task, start to feel a lot of stress, even with a simple activity like this. Switch tasking is a thief. But the good news is, when you reduce switches, you'll have more free time, you'll make fewer mistakes, and you'll feel less stress.
Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that little experiment. I wonder if you would let me know through the chat, how did your experiment work for you? Did you find that the switch tasking simulation in that second step, did you make a mistake? Did it slow you down? Did your handwriting suffer? I'd be curious to hear a little summary of your results. That would be great. Or if someone wants to unmute and share out loud, feel free to do that too. I'd like to hear from you and how that went for you.
Switch tasking. Oh, switch taking. Is it tasking?
Tasking,
It's a
yeah.
thief. It's a thief. It's awesome. It's horrible. This was very, very good experiment. Oh my goodness. I'm going to do one thing at a time.
Yeah, I love that, Gloria. It's like when you realize what your brain is having to do by switching back and forth, it's like, wait a minute, am I doing that all day?
That's too much. No wonder I'm pulling my hair out. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I love that. I'm glad. It was funny when I did this with my group of college students, they kind of jokingly said to me, like, we see the research, but we don't agree with it. We're really great at multitasking. Our generation is great at it. That was what they said. And then you know what happened when they got to the second test where you had to do letter, number, their time increased by 15, 20 seconds each, and their handwriting was awful. And the slant started to go down, right? So maybe some of the things that happened to you as well. So when we do this, I'm glad you liked that. Feel free to use that. The guy's name is Dave Crenshaw, and that video will be linked in your slides when you get it. And feel free to replicate that little activity with a group of people or a group of students. It's a really good eye opener, isn't it?
Yes, thank you. I will.
Yeah,
thank you.
Of course. Yeah. So this is kind of the framing for today's conversation, which is like, if multitasking is not effective, we're not good at it. We just showed that we're not good at it, and our brains are not built for it. So what approach should we be taking to our work when we support other people, whether it's who we're training or who we're working with or who we're teaching? We do need to do a lot of things, but we need to be doing some planning up front so that we can be multidisciplinary approaches, not multitaskers. That's kind of our goal today. So we're going to be thinking about how to kind of plan what I call well and wisely, right? You're going to plan well, and I'm going to plan wisely on the front side so that we're making life easier for ourselves, school more effective for our students, and training more efficient for our participants, whomever it is that we're working with. These adults in our lives, we can approach them from a different perspective. Instead of scrambling to do 17 things all at one time and doing them kind of badly, let's think about how we can approach that differently. So that's our perspective for the day. So here is one example. I have chosen a classroom example to start. This would be something that would probably feel very familiar to you from like a high school perspective. I go to this class and I study this subject for this 47-minute period. And when the bell rings, I move. And then I'm in a different class and I'm studying a different content area, a different subject. And that's how we tend to think about education in general. Isolating, in other words. We see things in isolation. Your program in adult education, for instance, might be set up this way. I have a class for language arts. I have a class for math. Students do one thing versus another. Maybe your program is not built like that, but many, many of them are. But the thing is we don't have to do it that way. In fact, we can multidisciplinary plan and do this a little bit differently. And you may be thinking, well, I'm not a classroom teacher, but you're right. I do kind of I think about things siloed in my work, or when I'm working with other people, I tend to think about like one goal at a time. And that is usually not a bad approach, except can we think about how things overlap so that we can think about how to do more than one thing at once without switch tasking badly? So that's going to be our perspective. So this is one approach. I'm going to teach language arts in this time period. I'm going to do my language instruction, my social studies, my math, everything in its place, right? And then also over here on the right-hand side, adult educators, you also have to do college and career readiness. You have to teach technology, soft skills. All of these things have to be done. So when are you going to do them? So as opposed to that, one of the things that happens is when we have that silo approach, unfortunately, in adult education in particular, our textbooks kind of lend themselves to that silo approach. I have here two just random table of contents from a couple of adult education books. And one thing you'll notice is that they're very skill oriented. And by that, I mean, we're going to teach one skill at a time. We're going to teach inference. We're going to teach main idea. Or in math, we're going to teach evaluating expressions, and then we're going to teach simplifying expressions. And every lesson is discrete, meaning it stands by itself. And we move through them lesson to lesson. Here's another example of a different table of contents. These call them strategies, but same idea. Look, inferences, theme, central idea, they break them all apart, right? It's a very typical approach for adult education. I teach this skill, then I teach this skill, then I teach this skill. What I want to show you is, though, when you do that, one of the things that happens is that I have to make students, for instance, in a language arts textbook, they have to read this passage and then learn this skill. And then we have to turn the page, and now we're reading a different passage and we're learning another skill. Now we go to a third page. You see what I mean? I'm wasting time asking my students to read multiple passages so that we can change skills. There are lots of other ways that we could approach this that would save us a lot of time. It would also help our students embed their learning a little differently. You may be thinking, well, okay, in my context outside of the classroom, do I have components of my job where I have to think about giving information to people, multiple different kinds of information? Is there a way that I can do it where it's not so siloed, right? So that's how we want to think about this. So let's see what that might look like. Here would be, for instance, in those lists of skills we were just looking at, here's a better approach to maximizing time, which is to organize things by theme or concept rather than teaching individual skills. We group things together. So when you teach like this, the idea would be I could pull from multiple categories of what I need to get students to learn, and I could teach them multiple ideas and skills in the same lesson or in the same class period. That's the framework here in a classroom setting. I could say, hey, instead of just teaching this one lesson about language arts main idea, I'm going to figure out a way to teach language arts main idea and some workplace readiness skills and some technology, and I'm going to embed all of that in a social studies concept. You see what I did? I kind of pulled something from every box, and I'm going to manage to figure out a way to put it all in one lesson. This is our goal, okay? A lot of people don't teach this way because our textbooks are not built this way in adult education. So that's one of the things that we're encouraging here. So you can ask yourself, what theme or concept do I want to teach? And which of these multiple content areas could I embed into the lesson and still accomplish my original goal? Remember, we're not going to be thinking about switch tasking, right? Going back and forth between these concepts. We want to embed them all, incorporate them all into one activity so that the students see how these skills overlap and how they all relate. So huge benefits to planning this way when we do so. So what are some of those benefits? Here they are. And remember, you could be thinking about this multidisciplinary approach outside of a classroom, could be in your Title I program, whatever your role is, when you have to deliver information to people, thinking about it from a non-siloed approach. How can I bring several different ideas together to make it all make sense, and I can do more than one thing at a time? When we do that, we call it multidisciplinary. When we do that, we're helping people see connections, meaningful connections between ideas, as opposed to learning everything in silo. That's one benefit. Another benefit is this time on task. We just learned that when we switch tasks back and forth, we lose time, right? That's what we learned in our little activity. When we can layer several disciplines or several different concepts into the same activity or the same training or the same class period, we actually are using our time much more efficiently. That's a benefit for all of us on the job. Communicating, when you can get active exploration of a theme, instead of just having students learn isolated skills, but when you teach by theme, what happens is you tend to promote dialogue between the people that are in your room or the people that are in your training. And when that happens, we're developing those important speaking and listening skills that our students need for the workplace and for their careers. And then I love this last one. One of my favorite words, authenticity. That's a lovely word. What it means is it's realistic, right? When we're in the real world, when we have a problem that appears or something that needs to be solved, it's generally not isolated where we can go, oh, that's one exact problem and has one exact answer. Things are complicated. They're layered. And so when we present cross-curricular or multidisciplinary learning, that is really more like what real world problem solving looks like. So those are the benefits. If you see other benefits that you'd love to add, feel free to put them in the chat. I'd be happy to see them. But those are the four that I kind of settled on as our biggest points of benefit when we approach things from this direction here. So, be used in contexts other than teaching? Well, the answer to that is absolutely yes. Certainly the multidisciplinary approach, yes, makes a lot of sense and works beautifully in a classroom. But that multidisciplinary, even though we might not use the word discipline, multi-theme, multi-concept, all of that applies. And how do we know that? Well, partly because of this gentleman who's on my screen. This is Malcolm Knowles. He is the father, quote unquote, of adult education. He created something we call andragogy, which is as opposed to pedagogy. You may be familiar with the word pedagogy, which is kind of the science behind learning for children. And so when we have andragogy, the idea is there is a science behind the learning that adults experience. And he put together some key understandings of the ways that adults learn. And you may think, well, but I'm not a teacher. Yes, but when you work with adults in any capacity, you are acting some way as a teacher or a trainer or an instructor of some kind. You're giving them information that they need to remember, do something with. You are instructing or demonstrating. And the way that we do that is very different with adults than it is with children. That may be a new idea to you if you're not in Title II adult education. So let's talk about that for a second. We can use adult learning theory no matter what way you work with adults, okay? No matter what the setting is. So here are some examples of what adult learning theory tells us. If you know some of these, I would be thrilled to see you drop them into the chat. Here's the first one. Since adults are self-directed, they should have a say in the content and process of their learning. This is, as opposed to children and the way they learn best, adults need to have some control over their learning. The way in which they learn, the content of what they're learning, they will learn best if they have some measure of control. Now, can adults always choose everything about their learning or about the way they're being given information? Absolutely not. Some things are mandated. Some things have to be done a certain way. True. But when you can give the adults a measure of control, you're going to want to do that. Adults learn best in that setting. Okay, that's point number one. Let's look at number two. What else did Malcolm Knowles tell us? Adults have so much experience to draw on. Life experience, family experience, job experience. Their learning should actually build on what they have already learned, meaning we should always presume to start from where our adults have left off and move forward to continue their learning. Okay. Children, you can put them in a classroom and say, I'm going to show you something brand new you've never heard of. And they're like, woohoo, show me, teacher. Adults, you will teach them best and you will demonstrate and help them learn best if you say you already know something about this topic and you actually activate what we call activate their background knowledge. Help them recognize what they already do know about a policy or about a concept or about a rule or about a safety guideline or whatever it might be. Activate that with them. What do you already know about this? Then start building the new information. That is adult learning theory. And again, we can apply that in literally any context in which you interact with other adults. What's number 3? Adults are looking for practical learning. So what you teach them should focus on issues related to their work or personal life. As often as possible, we should try to make connections to something that's practical and applicable to their life. Does this always happen? No. Sometimes you just have to teach them how to divide a fraction and you just have to do it. But can you set the context of that division of the fraction in something that they might actually use in real life? Sure, you could probably come up with something. That's the goal here. Children, again, you can just say you have to learn this. They're going to be, okay, fine. But adults will learn best if you apply it to their life in some practical way. And here's the 4th one. Instead of asking adults to memorize, they do best when they can solve a problem. I want you to think about yourself as an adult for a second. You are an adult learner, if you didn't know that. You're literally in a webinar learning something, and you're an adult. So do you think that it's more effective to just be given a list and told to memorize, or to be given something that you can interact with and engage with to try to solve a problem or figure out an issue? Like, you already know the answer to this. You tend to do best as an adult when you have these 4 things shaping the way you learn. When we can do this, and I'll give you an example of what this might look like, we are helping adults learn best. Can adults memorize straight lists of information? Of course they can. Can they learn when they don't have a choice in what they learn? Yes, they can. Can they learn something brand new even if you don't contextualize it from their background? Yes, they can. But remember, it's adults learn best when. So we're trying to maximize what our adults can do. I wonder if you, as you're sitting there thinking, are thinking of something in your own workplace or your own life on the job where you have had to teach something to an adult and you're thinking, oh, I did one of those. I activated one of those 4 things and I didn't really know that I was doing it, but I did. I wonder if anybody has an example of that they want to share. You could write it in the chat. I'm going to give you one example out loud here. And then if anybody else has one they'd like to share, I'd love to hear. Here's one example. How about instead of giving your adults in whatever context, whether it's a classroom or whether it's at the front desk of a job center, wherever you are, what if instead of just giving them facts, things they have to know, what if you were able to give them a scenario, a real life example that they could put themselves in to try to figure out the solution to a problem? When you put information in a context that makes sense to an adult, they can learn, they can apply. So for instance, let's say, let's pretend you had a safety standards that you had to learn in your workplace. There's safety rules that have to be shared. You could just hand over the handbook that filled with all the safety guidelines and say, there, read the handbook, sign it, and turn it in. You're done. Or you could present a rule, and then you could present a scenario that says, what should this person do in order to be safe based on the guidelines? And then they have to go back and look at the guidelines, and they have to think about the scenario, write their answer, right? That's what I mean by adult learning theory. It's not that they can't learn it the other way. It's what's more effective. What's more effective? They learn why the rule is in place, how it's there to protect them. That's contextualize, putting the learning in a context. I wonder if anybody else has a suggestion or an example of how some of these concepts of adult learning theory might work in your world and in your job. I'll give you a second to think. Anybody want to unmute and share? You can. Okay. So we'll sit on this learning theory slide for just a second, just to remind ourselves that this does take place in adult education classrooms, this learning theory, but it also takes place in every setting in which you're interacting with adults. I'll give you one example of a resource that's out there that I really like. On the Padlet that I'm going to share with you with these slides that has a list of all the resources. One of them is this article called Adult Learning Theory in the Workplace, and it specifically addresses some of those key concepts of Malcolm Knowles' theory, and they then place it in workplace training. And how would I apply that when I'm working with adults in a work setting? And they give great examples of, for instance, using real-world scenarios. They talk about how to embed technology. They talk about how to embed choice into the learning. One of the examples they talk about is when a training is mandated. As we discussed, there are sometimes things are just mandated. Is there a way that you can provide some flexibility, not in the what of the learning, but in the how of the learning? How will the adults access it? When will they? Will they do it alone or with a partner, etc.? There are other ways that maybe, if we've never done it that way before, we might ask ourselves, have I ever tried to do it differently, to see if I could help my adults learn a little differently? So I share that just as a heads up that resource is out there on the Padlet, and it's a nice resource to check out. Just another way to think about interacting with the adults in our life. Okay, so we're going to go back to the classroom just for a minute and put some context there. But remember, if you're not in that setting, just remember to think about this part of the presentation through the lens of how you work with adults. What setting do you use in adults, and what can you take away from the perspectives here? Oh, great. Thank you, Michael. I see that. He's got added a YouTube link about learning how to learn, which is a wonderful metacognitive concept. Thank you for sharing that resource, Michael. Okay. So a reminder that when we're in adult education, and for you who are in Title I, this might be good if you're not aware, we do have a set of standards around which we are to build our instruction when we work with our Title II adult ed students. They're called the College and Career Readiness Standards. So the idea is that in every classroom, every adult education classroom in the state, we're all teaching to the same standards, ideally. They overlap beautifully with the standards that are on the TABE and the CASAS tests. They also overlap with the GED test in many ways. And the idea is that we are helping our students become both college ready and career ready. That's our obligation as teachers. So if you don't already have access to these standards, there's a bookmark link to them on the website when you get the slides that you'll want to check out. Here's an example of one of the anchor standards, one of the core standards in language arts that we would have to teach. I want everybody to participate in this because, again, what you have to teach in your role could be very different. It could be a specific rule or policy or the way a process works that you have to share. In this case, I'm just using a teaching standard as our basis. Here's the standard. Your job is to teach students to delineate and evaluate the argument and specific claims in a text, including the validity of the reasoning, as well as the relevance and sufficiency of the evidence. So that's a big, long mouthful. Basically, what it's saying is, can you read something and say, that's the claim being made, there's the evidence, and I can evaluate that evidence and that claim to say how relevant they are and sufficient. That's my goal. So there are lots and lots and lots of ways you could get students to demonstrate proficiency in that standard. Tons of different activities and things that you could do. I'm going to show you a silo approach to teaching this, okay? Kind of that one idea, I have this standard and I'm going to teach it. I'm going to go out on the internet and I'm going to find an article and I'm going to pull it off. I'm going to have my students read it and they're going to find the claim, the main claim that the article's making, and then they're going to find some evidence that supports that claim. So they're going to say, there's the argument or the claim, and here's a couple pieces of evidence that the author uses. They're going to find that, maybe they mark it, and then they're going to write a little bit, maybe a paragraph response, turn it back into me. Now, would those three things accomplish my goal? Partially, yeah, it's not bad. But I will say that is a silo approach to teaching that one standard. I bet you there's other ways we can do it. So I'm going to ask you to pause with me. And I love this picture of this little kiddo. If you hadn't seen this, I love this hat. We're going to brainstorm. You don't have to put on a hat that fancy to brainstorm, although maybe you want to. We're going to think for a second about a way to teach that, identify a claim, evaluate some of the supporting evidence. We're going to figure out a way to teach that in a multidisciplinary way, as opposed to a siloed way. So remember this. What else could we logically add to that lesson about claims and evidence? Instead of just having them read, identify the claim, identify the support, write it in a paragraph, hand it in. Is there something else we could do? Yeah, lots of things. Could I bring in some of these other concepts like technology or career awareness or workplace or soft skills? Or could I do any of these other things? I bet I could. So what I would love for you to do is to brainstorm a little bit. I put the anchor standard back up there for you, and my original activity, I wonder if you would think of some ways. You can jot them down on a piece of paper. You can put them in the chat. How else could we build up this activity to be doing multiple things in one activity instead of just this one standard? I'll give you a second to work and think. And again, please feel free to put it in the chat. Feel free to jot it down on paper. We are thinking about these concepts. How can I embed some of these other things like technology and soft skills and math? Can I get some of these other things going when I'm teaching this same standard? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes of silence. Okay, thanks for your thinking time. I appreciate that. If you wouldn't mind, I would love it if you would just take one of the concepts maybe that you think you could embed into an activity like this to make it do more than one thing. I would love it if you would tell me one. Gloria's already added one in the chat. Oh, and Dawn too, both said technology. You have them do some research online. Instead of you finding the article, let the students go out and look. There's the technology. Michael mentioned case studies in answering how and why something is happening. So instead of just having them look at a claim and say, there's the evidence, you could maybe present a case study and ask them to develop a case study. Yeah, great. Thank you. Anybody else who would like to add a suggestion? It can just be either I'm going to go back one screen. It could be any of these items that we're kind of looking for. Oh, Karen, thank you. Yeah. The topic of your article, right, could be chosen specifically to cover a science concept. And that way you're covering you're covering a language arts skill in a science context. Oh, Ellen, thank you. Students could kind of discuss the opposing claims, right? They could say, I see this claim, but here's the other side of that argument. And you could ask them to look for that. Love that. Yeah, thank you. Perfect. Thank you guys for that. Yeah, it's not probably as hard maybe as we make it out to be. Again, our textbooks sometimes teach us to silo things, and maybe the policies and the guidelines around which our work is organized kind of breaks everything down into chunks. But when we're working with adults, we can actually embed multiple things into a conversation or into a class, and they can do multiple things at a time. So for instance, here's that anchor standard again. Here's some ideas that I had brainstormed with another group of people I was working with recently. Here's some of the things they came up with. They said, hey, kind of like what Ellen just said about using a science article, they said, pick a workplace context, something that has to do with the job, like a marketing ad for a product, and talk about sales. And there's a career awareness concept about marketing and working in advertising. Okay. And then they said, you could have students find the claims that are made in the ad, as opposed to an article, have them analyze ads and ask them to be finding data and things about cost, about sales. Now you're embedding math. And then the group also suggested, hey, instead of having students work alone, just put them in groups. And instead of having them write their answers, have them create a PowerPoint of some kind, where maybe they embed a graph or a chart to demonstrate some of the things that they've learned from their ads. There's some more technology. And then ask the students to present that PowerPoint to the class, explain the claims, show the evidence, field some questions from the class. Now we have soft skills, right? Because they're doing this presentation and they're learning to talk professionally in front of a group of people. Soft skills. So that went from teaching one language arts standard to teaching a language arts standards with 4 other content areas embedded into it, right? And we just did that through a quick brainstorm. All of you came up with something that would make that multidisciplinary approach work. So here's another one. For those of you out there, I don't know if I have any math lovers out there. If you love math on the job or in the classroom, here's a quick example of a math standard. The goal here is to help students become fluent with operations with multi-digit whole numbers and decimals. That's here on the left. And over here on the right, what will the learner be able to do? Fluently multiply whole numbers and decimals. They're going to be able to multiply numbers and decimals. The question is, can you identify 2 other content areas or 2 other skills that you could incorporate onto a math lesson that's teaching that about how to multiply numbers and decimals? What other things could you embed? I'll give you a second to think. And you can stick them in here. Yes, Gloria, I see you there about the Venn diagram. Great suggestion for that claim evidence. I'll give you a second to think. If language arts isn't your thing, maybe you're a math person. How would you embed some other content areas into a lesson about multiplying numbers and decimals? What could you do to make that information stick, but also do other content area? Terrific. Thank you, Ellen. If you take a peek in your chat, Ellen suggests a shopping problem with a percentage off, and then the students have to determine the cost. That is a wonderful way to tie a math skill to a real life problem or a real life situation. That's one of Malcolm Knowles' major principles, is to set the information in a context that is familiar to the adult. And that's lovely. That's a good context that you could put that in. Wonderful. What other ways could we embed other kinds of themes, content, or skills into this multiplication standard? Any other ideas? Oh, Karen suggests, hey, put it in a business context. Pick a business setting, and then maybe figure out profits that are calculated for a specific term or a specific year. Yeah, I love that. And then maybe the student could be invited to discuss that business, right? And what kind of work would you do if you worked in that field? We can embed the math in a conversation around jobs within that field, right? So we've embedded two different conversations there happening. Yeah. It's not difficult to get people, adults, to think about how workplace, career awareness, concepts of being involved in the workplace matches with other concepts that they need to know in the subject areas. It just takes a little bit of creativity on the teacher's part sometimes to present it in a way that those contexts make sense. But we can do it, and it's very important to give our adult students, our adult learners, the ability to see themselves in contexts that are future oriented, right? I could do that work. I could be in that field. I could join that career. And all of you are invested in that, I know, as part of your roles. Excellent. So one other concept that I'll just mention very briefly is the idea that if you are finding that you still don't have a lot of time in either your teaching role or your training role, whether you're training adults or you're teaching adult learners, whichever, if you're running out of time, a flipped model works really well. And there are lots of different ways to do it. I'm going to show you one approach, and you could take it and use it in lots of different ways. Here's how it looks. I share my screen with you. You can take a peek. This is just kind of a visual of what happens when you invert the traditional classroom. That's why they call it flipped. So the idea would be in the traditional classroom, the teacher is what we call the sage on the stage. He or she stands in front of the room. They present a bunch of direct instruction or direct information given through a lecture, maybe. And then they give a bunch of homework, and the students take it home and do a bunch of the problems or try to complete the essay, whatever. When that happens, that is a traditional classroom setting. What we're suggesting is that you flip that and that you have a lot of that direct instruction, that lecture component, happen on their own, on the student's own time, at their own pace. Usually it's done through video. And then when they get into the classroom and they have the teacher with them or the trainer with them, they do the application part, the homework part. So they're working and trying to apply what they learned, and they have the teachers to serve as the guide on the side. I really like that, as opposed to the sage on the stage. That's the idea, the guide on the side. He or she is there to assist students as they interact with each other, but he is not simply delivering core information that was done in advance, usually again through video. That's the idea of a flipped classroom. So let's take a peek at some of the benefits of that flipped classroom. And again, classroom is the idea, but you could do this with any kind of training that you're doing with adults, where you ask them to take in some information in advance. And then when they're with you, you get to do the application, the using of the information, so that you can monitor where are they not understanding, how can I help them, as opposed to them doing that on their own. So one of the things that allows the benefits here is people can work their own pace. It's definitely self-directed. This is much more along the lines of adult learning theory. It also honors diverse learning styles. Some people do better when they get to watch a video. They can turn on the captions, they can listen, they can rewind it, etc. That group time, when you are the guide on the side and the adults are working together, group work, peer collaborations, discussions, all of that happens a lot more than it does in a lecture style. And also it enables exploration in a contextualized setting. Again, let's look at a problem, a situation, a scenario, and talk it through based on what you learned in the video you watched before you came to the meeting today or to the class today. Those are some of the benefits of the flipped classroom. You may be thinking, well, in my world, I don't have a classroom, but I do actually have to present information to adults on a regular basis. Have you ever considered giving it to them in advance in some format, whether it's on a recorded video, whether it's just a document that they could preview? And then when they come to the meeting, when they come to the training, then you can have them do something with that information because they've already seen it. It's a good model. It does take a little bit of getting used to. And so sometimes it won't work perfectly the first time you try it. It is worth trying because of all these benefits that are on the screen here. Now, flipped classroom model does assume a couple of things. Number one, that everybody has access usually to some sort of digital tools outside of class. It also requires people to do the work outside of their time in class or in the training. There's some front-loaded homework. So let's talk about the first problem first, which is access. Not everybody always has access to everything, but I will say videos can be watched on their phone, and everybody's got a phone, it seems. And so keep in mind that they don't necessarily have to have a computer with a big screen in front of them to participate. If you send them a quick video to watch, they should be able to watch it on their phone. Most documents that you send are readable also through a phone. So you could experiment a little bit and figure out how to give everybody access. The other thing is if you have computers on site at your location, you could ask people to participate by watching the thing or reading the thing in advance from one of the computers on site if they just come a few minutes early for the appointment or for the class. So there are ways around that access problem. The other problem is that homework problem, which is we don't always in adult education in particular require homework. But sometimes we probably should. Students are expected to become college and career ready, and we are not preparing them well for the college environment, certainly if we never require homework. And also, many times in the workplace, there are things you have to do that are above and beyond. So you can change the expectation in your classroom. Your students will adjust. So for you educators out there, remember, college and career ready, you can't make them college ready without preparing them to do some independent work. So that's another barrier for flipped classroom that we can maybe work around a little bit. Here's another example of kind of that multidisciplinary approach. One of the ways you can do that as a classroom teacher is to use a lesson plan, like a template for your lessons that actually encourages multidisciplinary. So in this case, I'll point out a couple. You can see that like there's an area skill. The implication is there's going to be more than one, that there's going to be real life materials being used, and that the activities are going to embed multiple ideas. This one happens to be an example of a plan where the students are going to plan a vacation that involves at least one interruption in their travel arrangement. And so they have to use maps. They have to have prices for how they're going to use the mode of transportation and their hotels. They have to have calculators. They have to do research online to figure out where they're going to go and where they're going to stay and how long it's going to take and how much gas money they need and right? That is a multidisciplinary lesson. So it doesn't have to be something super fancy. It doesn't have to be like a magic trick as we're thinking. It can be something as simple as, hey, plan a vacation. Yeah, that's it. They've got to figure it out. There are lots of examples of multidisciplinary lesson plans. I've included those all on the Padlet for you teachers. If it's something you're interested in, they all require multiple content areas for you to include. And that way you can help your students, your learners think from a multidisciplinary perspective. Okay. So here is another set of resources. I'm going to show you a couple of different ones, actually, when we're trying to think about how to do things in a multidisciplinary fashion. One of the resources for you teachers out there in particular is something called Slow Reveal Graphs. That is a direct link to Slow Reveal Graphs. I want to show you what they are. And even those of you who are not in the classroom, I want to explain the concept of a slow reveal graph, because I feel like this is a thing that we could embed in lots of different ways that we train and deliver information. I wonder how many of you, sometimes, if you saw this information over here on the right that says not everybody loves chocolate, and it has all this information, it has the key, it has numbers, it has kilograms, it has bars, it has country codes and flags. I wonder if some of you, your brain kind of goes on overload when you see that. Maybe you think your students, their brains also might go on overload if they saw that. I wonder how many of you might put in the chat and let me know if that is like a lot of information to try to absorb at one time. I'd be curious to know. Because if so, slow reveal graphs might be just for you. The way they work is that think of it as a series of Google Slides or PowerPoint slides where there's going to be several, and they start with this one up here in the upper left. You see how the bars, it's a simple bar graph, and you have some different heights of bars, and you have a couple of pieces of data. You have 1 kilogram and 0.2 kilograms for this little tiny sliver of a bar. That's it. There's nothing else on that graph. That'd be the only thing that would be showing that your students or your audience would see. And then you would click to the next slide, and maybe a few more numbers would appear for the kilograms on a few more bars. Maybe something would show up on the X or the Y axis, right? In other words, a sprinkle at a time, the information would show up on each consecutive slide. And you can pause and you can ask questions of your students. You can say, hey, what are we learning here? What did this new information just make us understand? How does it change our thinking? And one at a time until you get to the final slide, which is the one over here on the right, where you actually understand what that graph is about. It's about the estimated chocolate consumption per capita in these countries in 2021. And we can learn a lot of information. And oh my goodness, talk about multidisciplinary. You guys, we could talk about finances. We could talk about adding up these dollar amounts. We can talk about how much kilogram per dollars. We can talk about where these countries are on a map, right? On and on and on and on, multidisciplinary. But instead of just dumping the graph at people and asking them to process it, a slow reveal graph makes them think critically about what they're seeing and how the information is unloading. I'm going to show you, this is what the slow reveal graphs website looks like. They have like how to build them, and then they have whole bunch. You can view all graphs, you can search for them. I just wanted to show you a couple of recent ones they've put up, including the length of rushing touchdowns from the Philadelphia Eagles, the Barkley and Hurts. What have they done? It's just a graph about that. Who Americans spend their time with, how fast insects fly. All of a sudden, I'm seeing sports, I'm seeing science, I'm seeing social studies, right? Amazon versus eBay. So there's tons and tons and tons of these. And when you click on them, it has a little explanation of what the graph, slow reveal graph is. It has some sample questions, and it has the slide deck that you can actually download and use in your own class. I really love this resource. It's going to be in our presentation slides. If you're a teacher, I would encourage you to use it. If you're not a teacher, what I want you to think about from this concept is the idea of, remember, our brain sometimes goes on overload when we see too much information. Think about the material that you're giving to your adults in your contexts. How much information are you giving them all at once and expecting them to understand, right? Are they going to have to switch tasks between 6 different things on that paper or in that packet or in that folder, whatever you're handing them? Is there a way that we can more slowly produce the information so that people can receive it in smaller chunks, maybe in a way that makes sense, where they can pause and ask some questions along the way? So the concept of the slow reveal graph, whether you end up using that website resource or not, I hope the concept of it rings true for you in some way, that we can present information in smaller chunks, a little bit at a time. People might have a better chance of grasping what we want them to learn. Okay. Second resource of the day for multidisciplinary activities, the New York Times has wonderful resources called What's Going On in This Graph and What's Going On in This Picture. These are linked. They have a graph. It has a lot of information on it. And then they have a bunch of questions supplied that you can ask your students around that graph or around that picture. They'll ask things like, what do you notice? What do you wonder? What questions do you have? Then they'll say, how does this relate to your community in any way? Or they might say, write a headline for this picture or for this graph that will capture the main idea, right? A lot of critical thinking. I want to show you, here's an example of what the website looks like. If you go to newyorktimes.com, what's going on in this graph. They have one out about every week. And you can see there's all kinds of things on here. There's one about lead poisoning. There's one about banned books. There's one about Uncrustables. I don't know how many of you put Uncrustables in your kids' lunch. Drought, where we work, all kinds of things. You click on it, it takes you to a blown up version of the graph, and then you can share it with students and ask them the questions to help prompt ideas. Same with the picture. This is just an idea that you can use one resource and you could do 100 different things with a graph. You could have math activities. You could have a writing activity. You can have them talking about it. You can place it in the context of the jobs that would be done around that field. Here we're talking about electricity production. So there are all kinds of things that we could do to make these multidisciplinary activities. Those resources are already available. They're already designed. They're ready to use. As a teacher, you can't beat that. So hopefully you'll take advantage of those resources. Now, I always want to say, like, okay, when you're in a training, you're in a presentation, sometimes you're wanting to yell back at the presenter, like, okay, but you don't know my situation. You don't understand. I hear you, but, right? And so I want to say what some of those buts might be, especially for teachers. They might say, well, yeah, but I have this lesson I already designed. I use this textbook that I already have. I don't want to start over. My program asks me to use a specific approved curriculum. I can't change that. I've already turned in all my lesson plans for the semester. Whatever your reasoning might be, and for you outside the classroom folks, one of your reasonings might be, look, I know I work with adults and I have to give them information. I have to train them or teach them something, but that material is given to me in a certain way and I don't know if I can change it. So let's stop for a second and say, okay, don't worry. We can still use this multidisciplinary approach, even if we have some of those hesitations. So let's talk about how that might look. Okay. Like you were listening to me and you're like, yeah, I hear you, Anita, I got it. But my situation is different. This is for you. Okay. You can still use a multidisciplinary approach. You might just have to do it a little bit on the fly. Okay. So what we want to do is think about building knowledge in the people that we're working with in small ways. So how, as you're teaching or as you're training or as you're leading an adult to a concept, think about the existing materials you have to do to use that. Once they've done the basics, they've completed the thing, they did the activity, is there something else you can do to build and extend their knowledge? Think about our brains, neural pathways, and how they work. The more we make connections between ideas, the more pathways we create, the better our brain is working for us. So if you have existing materials that you already have to use, you can make it multidisciplinary by what you do afterward. So let's talk about what that might look like here. You can ask yourself, you can ask questions like, how can I extend this? What else could be researched or investigated? To what can we connect this? That's a good question. I did this, but can I connect it to something else? So we can take what we already use and maybe build into it. So here's an example of something that I did with a group of adult learners not too long ago in a Zoom class. I shared this document on the screen and I asked my students to do these 3 steps. Read and reflect on this proverb from the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu. And there's the proverb. And then step 2 says, put in your own words what you think this saying means. They were allowed to do that verbally or in the chat. And then I asked them in number 3, why does the proverb contrast 1,000 miles with a single step? What's the purpose of that contrast? So there's a little bit of critical thinking. There's main idea summary. There's a little bit of reading. Okay, that was my activity. I'll let you look at that proverb for a second and reflect on it for a second. I wonder, as you're sitting there thinking, in what ways could that little activity right there be extended? What else could I do to it? It exists already. It was given to me. Here's a thing I want you to teach. Okay, but could I also do other things with it? Yes, and we did. I wonder what you might do to extend that activity if you were sharing that with a group of adults, whether in a workplace setting, in a classroom setting. What else could be done with this activity to extend it, to do something else and bring in another concept, another theme? What could you do? I'll give you a second to think. Feel free to unmute yourself if it's easier, or you can type in the chat. How would you extend this activity? I'll give a couple of hints on the screen. These are some questions that you could ask as you're thinking about how to extend that. Could you put this in another context for students or for your adult group to help them place this proverb in a different context? Oh, Ellen just suggests, hey, let them research other proverbs. What is a proverb? And ask them to go look them up and try to summarize and say what their meanings are. Yeah, I like that. Oh, Karen, you're reading my mind. That's what we ended up doing in my class to extend this activity. We took it straight to the first step out of many steps to achieve their ultimate career goal. That's exactly what we did. We tied it, this journey of 1,000 miles, we tied it to their goals. That's exactly right. And Kirsten, my screen just went blank, so I'm making sure that it's not black on your end.
It is, yes.
Yeah, it's black on our end.
Yeah, that's super unhelpful, isn't it? I'm going to just stop my share and reshare really fast, see if that fixes our problem. Apologize for that. See if that does it for us.
Yep, we could see it.
Thank you. Perfect. It wouldn't be a webinar without something technologically wrong, right, guys? I mean, that's just how it goes. Okay, so workplace goal, career goal, that's exactly where we went. The journey of 1,000 miles, we framed it as you're trying to get your GED. You've got a lot of steps in front of you to achieve your career goal. So what's that single step you need to take tonight in class, right? That's how we broke it down as the example, but absolutely we went straight to career goals. Thank you for that. Anybody else with any other ideas about how you would extend? I love the researching other proverbs and summarizing the goal connection. Any other connection you would make? Love that. The other thing I would say is things that like this that are simple. They don't have to be done in a classroom with adult education students. I could easily see doing this with my colleagues at work, my own team, thinking about the idea of a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. We could have a great discussion around this in the way it it affects and implicates our workplace, right? And our approach to our work. So it's a fun little connection there. All right. So one last reminder as we start to wrap up, just one thing from the research. When you're trying to teach adults anything, whether you're in a classroom or whether you're training them, whether you're trying to give them information about policies, whatever you're doing, one of the best ways to get them to remember what they have learned and apply what they have learned is to get them to write about it. The research says there's a Carnegie report available through links called Writing to Read. And it's all about the evidence for how writing improves reading. And then it has ties also to math, science, and other subject areas. The idea is that when students are reading text or reading something about a specific content area, their comprehension of that material improves when they write about it. That is true about math. It's true about any technical concept. It's one of the best ways that you can get students or adults to apply what they've learned, remember what they've learned, is to write about it. Now, you may think, well, in my workplace, that's kind of weird. Like if I'm giving people information about, the WIOA program for which they're applying, and I'm handing them a bunch of information, getting them to reiterate back to you, even verbally, what you have said is another good way of getting them to emphasize. It kind of mimics that idea of writing about what they've read. If you can ask them to orally summarize or say back to you what they have learned, even that approach is better than nothing because it helps solidify what they're hearing, what they're reading, and making sure that they can reproduce it. So in whatever setting you're working with your adults, this is something that you can always fall back on as an excellent opportunity, is when you need to reinforce what adults have learned, get them to write about it, or at the minimum, tell you or somebody else about it. That's the best way to help them enhance their learning. So I'll remind you about the link, Multitasking Teachers. In fact, that link right there is going to be the very first thing you'll see in the slide deck when you get it. And that Padlet it looks like this. Just show it to you briefly. If you've not seen a Padlet before, the idea is it looks kind of like a bulletin board. So all the things, there's a bunch of resources in here that you can use, things that I referenced, like the flipped classroom, and then there's all kinds of stuff. There's that adult learning theory in the workplace article. It's all on here. So that'll be there for you as you look through the slide deck. I appreciate your time and attention. I would love if you've got a question and you want to ask it, you can unmute and ask it. You can put it in the chat. But I want to thank you for joining me and for thinking through the ways that we can contextualize the information that we share with the adults in our lives. And appreciate you as you try to do everything all at once. I know it's a lot. Hopefully you can take that switch tasking concept and try to eliminate that out of your life. If nothing else today, that can be your takeaway. So I appreciate all of you being here. We'll give you a few minutes of your life back. And Kirsten, if you have anything you need to say to wrap us up, I'll let you do that. But I appreciate you having me today.
Thank you very much. This has been very, very helpful. I'm going to start it today. I was looking at the package I have. I'll have to re-evaluate this package I have for my students for WIOA. Yeah.
Thank you.
Much. Thank you so much. It's been very helpful.
Gloria. Appreciate all of you. Yeah.
I don't have anything, Anita, and everybody's just saying thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, guys. It's been great to get to see you and spend a little time. Hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon and evening. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.